Welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. This is episode 19, and in this episode, we're joined by a very special guest, Mark Johnson, the author of Spitting in the Soup, Inside the Dirty Game of Doping in Sports. And that's
start off with this. One thing that I found really fascinating, and the book kind of opens up with this, is this idea that one of the factors contributing to doping being frowned upon before the turn of the century was that potentially, sort of pushing that hard in sport was viewed as something that the working class would do, or viewed as something that, if you pushed really hard in sport, got too competitive, took drugs, you could kind of move up the ladder. And the old sort of landowning classes viewed that negatively. And that was potentially one of the areas where this sort of negative feeling towards doping was born, even as it's applied to something as competitive as sports. Is that kind of accurate, or do you want to expand on that a little bit there?
Yeah, sure. And thanks so much for having me on. So yeah, and to understand that is really, you have to understand that up until 1988. When the Olympic Games invited professionals, the Olympics was about amateurism, even though, particularly throughout the Cold War, that was really a sham, because particularly athletes from Eastern European countries and the Soviet bloc, they were professionals, but they were pretending to be amateurs. But at the beginning of the Olympics, and the Olympics started in the 1890s, it was the domain of amateurs. And even for the Olympic founders, who were aristocrats, landowning aristocrats, even the notion of training was frowned upon, because that was something that professionals did. So it wasn't so much the act of taking cocaine, or after it was first synthesized in the 1920s, amphetamines, in order to increase performance, it was frowned upon. It was the fact that doing that is what professionals did, because professionals were expected to turn to pharmaceuticals, and don't look at them so much as pharmaceuticals, but as just as technical advantages and developments that athletes turn to naturally, pros, in order to ply their trade at a higher level. So taking drugs inherently wasn't evil. It was taking drugs was inherently professional. And that's what the Olympic founders didn't like about using drugs in sport. But as far as the pros were concerned, whether you were particularly a professional cycling, because cycling really started as a sport where people raced to make money. And it was expected, particularly because the early bike races were so grueling, that athletes had to take stimulants more than anything in order to do it. Original 6-day races, riders literally rode around a velodrome for 6 days. So doing that for 6 days without using cocaine or later amphetamines was just inhumane, that you would be expected to do that without any sort of stimulant.